Hi everyone, welcome to chapter 15, the special senses. The sense of the touch is one of the general senses mediated by general receptors, and we have covered that in chapter 13. In this chapter, we are going to talk about special senses, and the special senses of the body include vision, taste, smell, hearing, and equilibrium. All use special sensory receptors which are distinct receptors localized in the head region. 70% of the body's sensory receptors are in eye, and half of the cerebral cortex is involved in visual processing. First, let's look at the eye. Eye is a small sphere, only 1/6 of the surface is visible. The rest is being enclosed and protected by the fat cushion and the bony orbit. Eye consists of accessory structures and the eyeball. So here it has been shown what is being visible, that is the 1/6. The rest has been embedded in the fat and the orbit. The accessory structures protect the eye and it aid the function of the eye. The structures include eyebrows, eyelids, conjunctiva, lacrimal apparatus, and extrinsic eye muscles. And let's go over one at a time very briefly. The eyebrows, it's overlie the supraorbital margins. The functions include shade eye from sunlight, prevent perspiration from reaching the eye. The eyelids, also called palpebrae, thin skin-covered folds which protects the eye anteriorly. The eyelids separated at the palpebral fissure and meet in corners at the medial and lateral commissures. The lacrimal caruncle, located at medial commissure, contains oil and sweat glands. The eyelids also contains tarsal plates, which is a supporting connective tissue for folds, as well as anchor orbicularis oculi and levator palpebrae superioris muscles. When eyelids blink, it's a reflex activity. It happens every 3 to 7 seconds. Eyelashes have follicles that are innervated and nerve endings initiate the reflex blinking. Lubricating glands associated with eyelids, they are the tarsal meibomian glands, the modified sebaceous glands which produce oily secretions, and ciliary glands between hair follicles, and these are modified sweat glands. You would see the lateral view of some of the structures, and it's been shown in this sagittal section that we have identified so far. So here you would find the levator palpebrae superioris muscle, the orbicularis oculi muscle, the tarsal plate, which enables the attachment of the levator palpebrae superioris muscle, the palpebral conjunctiva, tarsal glands, the cornea, palpebral fissure, eyelashes, bulbar conjunctiva, conjunctival sac as such. The conjunctiva is a transparent mucous membrane which produces a lubricating mucus secretion. It is in two parts, or we can divide that into two parts: palpebral conjunctiva, which is the membrane that lines the underside of eyelids, and the bulbar conjunctiva, which is the membrane that covers the white of the eyes except the area of the cornea. The conjunctival sac is the space between the palpebral and the bulbar conjunctiva, and that is the area where your contact lenses rests. The lacrimal apparatus consists of lacrimal gland and ducts that drain into nasal cavity. Lacrimal gland is located in the orbit above the lateral end of the eye and it secretes lacrimal secretion. It is a dilute saline solution which contains mucus antibodies and antibacterial lysozymes. Blinking spreads tears toward the medial commissure where they enter paired lacrimal canaliculi via an opening called lacrimal puncta. The tears then drain into lacrimal sac and nasolacrimal duct, which empties into the nasal cavity. In this figure, it shows the lacrimal gland. The gland drains via the excretory ducts of the lacrimal gland. The tears flows across the eye, anterior side of the eye. The lacrimal puncta connects with the lacrimal canaliculus and the tears drains into this, the lacrimal sac, and then through the nasolacrimal duct, it drains into the nasal cavity. The extrinsic eye muscles, the 6 strap-like extrinsic eye muscles, they originated from the bony orbit and insert on the eyeball, and it enables eye to follow moving objects, maintaining shape of the eye and hold it in orbit. There are 4 rectus muscles and 2 oblique muscles. The 4 rectus muscles names as superior, inferior, lateral, and medial rectus, and the 2 oblique muscles are the superior and inferior oblique muscles. And here you would see the 4 rectus muscles indicated in black, labeled in black, and the 2 oblique muscles labeled in red. And here in this table, it shows the innervation for those muscles and the main actions of those muscles, which you need to know. Some of the clinical aspects of the stuff that we have so far discussed is that an infected tarsal gland results in an unsightly cyst called calazion, and inflammation of any of the smaller sebaceous glands is called a stye. There are 2 types of inflammations: conjunctivitis, which is the inflammation of the conjunctiva resulting reddened, irritated eyes. And the pink eye, it's due to conjunctival infection caused by bacterial and viruses, which is highly contagious condition. The nasal cavity mucosa is continuous with the mucosa of the lacrimal duct system, so cold or nasal inflammation often causes the lacrimal mucosa to swell, and this swelling constricts the ducts and prevent tears from draining, causing watery eyes. With related to the functional problems, the diplopia, double vision, occurs when movements of the external eye muscles of 2 eyes are not perfectly coordinated, and the person cannot focus images properly of the same area of the visual field from each eye. So the person sees 2 images instead of 1. This could result from paralysis of extrinsic muscles, weakness, or neurological disorders. Strabismus, the cross eye, is also a congenital weakness of external eye muscles, where the eye rotates medially or laterally. Eyes may alternate focusing on objects, or only controllable eye is used in this condition. Let's look at this structure of the eyeball. First, let's look at the wall. The wall contains 3 layers: the fibrous layer, vascular layer, and the inner layer. The internal cavity filled with fluids called humors, and the lens separates the internal cavity into anterior and posterior segments. And here you would see the walls of the eye as well as the internal cavities, the anterior chamber, the posterior chamber, and the lens. Let's go over these structures one by one. The fibrous layer, which is the outermost layer, dense avascular connective tissue. It composed of two regions, the sclera and cornea. Sclera is the opaque posterior region which protects and shapes the eyeball, and it allows the extrinsic muscles to anchor onto it. Posteriorly, it has the optic nerve opening, and the sclera is continuous with the dura mater of the brain. The cornea is this transparent anterior 1/6 of fibrous layer which forms clear window that lets the light enter and blends light into the eye. The cornea covers with an epithelium, and the outer surface protects from abrasion. The inner layer, corneal endothelium, contains sodium pumps which helps to maintain and clarity of the cornea. Numerous pain receptors contribute to the blinking and tearing reflexes of the cornea. The vascular layer is the middle layer, which is pigmented and called uvea. There are three regions in the vascular layer: choroid, ciliary body, and the iris. Choroid region is a posterior portion of the uvea which supplies blood to all layers of the eyeball, and it contains brown pigment which absorbs the light to prevent scattering of light, which would cause visual confusion. Ciliary body located anteriorly, and it's a thickened ring of tissue surrounding the lens. It consists of smooth muscle bundles, which we call ciliary muscles, which control the shapes of the lens. And capillaries of the ciliary process secretes fluid from anterior segment of the eyeball, and the ciliary zonule is a suspensory ligament extends from the ciliary processes to lens, and it holds the lens in position. The iris is the colored part of the eye which lies between the cornea and the lens, and it continues with the ciliary body. The pupil is an important component of the iris, which is a central opening that regulates amount of light entering the eye. It's not a structure, it's an empty space, but it's an opening. For close vision and bright light cause a sphincter pupillae, which is the circular muscle, to contract and pupils to constrict, and it's controlled by the parasympathetic activity. The distant vision and dim light cause dilator pupillae, which is controlled by the radial muscles to contract, and the pupils become dilated, and it's controlled by the sympathetic nervous system. Changes in the emotional state. Pupils dilate when subject matter is appealing or requires problem-solving skills, and you would see that your eyes get opening up and the pupils would dilate much. So here is the sphincter pupillae, muscles contracts and pupil constrict is a circular muscle. The dilator pupillae is the radiated, here it shows the two muscles, both the sphincter pupillae and the dilator pupillae, which is the radiated muscles. Once the dilator pupillae constrict, it will open up or widen the pupil, which is by the sympathetic. The sphincter pupillae, which is the circularly arranged muscle, which is controlled by the parasympathetic, and that will constrict the pupil. The third layer would be the inner layer, the retina. Retina originates as an outpocketing of brain. It contains millions of photoreceptor cells that transduce light and energy. It composed of neurons and glial cells. There are two delicate layered membrane. Outer is the pigmented layer and the inner is the neural layer. So here you would see the inner neural layer of the retina and pigmented layer of the retina, which is at the outside. The pigmented layer of the retina is a single cell thick lining next to the choroid. It extends anteriorly, covering ciliary body and the iris. The functions include absorbs light and prevents its scattering, phagocytic activity, and it stores vitamin A. The neural layer is the transparent layer that runs anteriorly to margin of ciliary body, and it composed of three main types of neurons: photoreceptors, bipolar cells, and ganglion cells. The signal spreads from the photoreceptors to the bipolar cells and to the ganglion accordingly. Ganglion cells, axons, exit eye as the optic nerve. The optic disc is site where the optic nerve leaves the eye, and it lacks photoreceptors, so we call it as the blind spot. Retina has 250 million photoreceptors that are one of the two types. That is, either it composed of rods or cones. Rods is response to dim light and for peripheral vision. More numerous and more sensitive to light than cones. So no color vision or sharp images created by rods, and numbers greatest at the periphery of the retina. The cones are the vision receptors for bright light and high resolution color vision. Macula lutea area at posterior pole lateral to blind spot, and it contains mostly cones. This is also called a fovea centriolaris, which is a structure, and it's a tiny pit in the center of the macula lutea that contains all cones. So that is the region with best visual acuity. When you're looking something, the eye movement allows us to focus in on objects so that fovea can pick it up. So here it shows the photoreceptors, which is the microscopy anatomy of the retina, and it's in order: the photoreceptors, the bipolar cells, and the ganglion cells. And the ganglion cells carry the signals and later produce the optic nerve. Two sources of blood supply to the retina, that is, the choroid supplies outer third, and the central artery and the vein of the retina supply the inner 2/3. Clinically, retinal detachment is a condition you would find often where the pigmented and the neural layers separate, allowing jelly-like vitreous humor to seep between them. And it can lead to permanent blindness. Usually happens when retina is torn during traumatic blow to head or sudden stopping of head during movement. Symptoms include that the victim's saying as curtain being drawn across the eye, and or soot-like spots or light flashes. The treatment include surgical treatment, reattachment of retina with laser surgery. Continuing off the structure of the eyeball, let's look at the internal chambers and the fluids. The lens and the ciliary zonule separate eye into two segments, which is the posterior segment and the anterior segment. The posterior segment contains vitreous humor, a fluid which transmits light, supports posterior surface of the lens, which holds neural layer of the retina firmly against the pigmented layer. The vitreous humor forms in the embryo and lasts whole lifetime, and that's an important fact. Anterior segment, it's the iris divides anterior segment into two chambers. The anterior chamber between the cornea and the iris, the posterior chamber between the iris and the lens. The entire segment contains the aqueous humor, a plasma-like fluid, and unlike the vitreous humor, it is continuously formed by capillaries of the ciliary process. Here you would see the anterior chamber and the posterior chamber, and it shows the circulation of the aqueous humor in these 3 steps. Clinically, glaucoma is a condition in which drainage of the aqueous humor is blocked, causing fluid to be back up and increase pressure within the eye. The pressure may increase to dangerous levels and compress retina and the optic nerve, leading to blindness. So symptoms, few early signs but late signs include seeing halos around lights and blurred vision. So detection, intraocular pressure is being detected, and you need to test it usually after the age of 40, which is glaucoma is common after 40 years. The treatment includes eye drops, which increase the rate of aqueous humor drainage or decrease its production, the laser therapy or surgical treatment. The lens. Lens is biconvex, transparent, flexible, and avascular. Changes shape to precise focus light or retina. There's two regions in the lens epithelium, anterior region of the cuboidal cells, which differentiate into lens fiber cells. The other part is the lens fibers, which forms the bulk of the lens and filled with transparent protein crystalline. Lens fibers are continually added, so lens becomes more dense, convex, and less elastic as you go through aging. Clouding of lens is a clinical condition where where it happens due to aging, diabetes mellitus, heavy smoking, frequent exposure to intense sunlight, and sometimes it could be congenital. And vitamin C increases the cataract formation and clouding of lens, and lens can be replaced surgically with artificial lenses. So this is the end of the presentation 1, and let's go over the presentation 2, which is presentation B, which we discuss some of the aspects of the light and the optics and how does the eye handle it. And in your PDF, which I have uploaded in the D2L, you would see much more lights and much more basic information of the features of the light and the characteristic features. So you need to read the textbooks as well as go over the PowerPoint PDF before you go over the rest of the component. So eyes, they respond only to visible light, and you have encountered several features like refraction of the lenses. So let's go over some of these concepts. Refraction defines as bending of light rays. It's due to change in the speed of the light when it passes from one transparent medium to another, and path of the light is at an oblique angle, as you would see in here. Like this is water is one media, air is the other media, so it seems like it bends at the intersurface. Lenses of the eyes can also refract light because they are curved on both sides. So based on the curvatures, you have two types of lenses, convex or concave. Convex defined as thicker in center than at edges, concave thicker at edges than in the center. So in convex lenses, it bends the light passing through it so that rays converge at the focal point, as you would see in here. So convex lenses will bend the light and make it into area of focal point. An image formed at the focal point is upside down and reversed from left to right. So you would see here the purple is at the bottom, but it's at the top now, as well as it's been at further away. Now it's much more closer to it. So reversed as well as upside down. Concave lenses disperse light, preventing light from being focused. And with related to the focusing light on the retina, the pathway of light entering eye is the cornea, aqueous humor, lens, vitreous humor, entire neural layer of the retina, and finally the photoreceptors. Light is refracted 3 times along this path when it's entering the cornea, when it's entering the lens and when it's leaving the lens. Majority of refractory power is in the cornea. So lens is able to adjust its curvature to allow for fine focusing. It can focus for distant vision and for close vision as well. Focusing for distant visions, eyes are best adapted for distant vision. There's far point of vision, which is the distance beyond which no change in lens shape is needed for focusing. For normal eye, it's a 20 feet, emmetropic, and cornea and the lens focus light precisely on retina at this distance. The ciliary muscles are completely relaxed in distant vision, and as a result, lens and it causes pull on the ciliary zonule, and due to that, lens are stretched and flat. For close vision, light from close objects less than 6 meters diverges as approaches the eye. It requires eye to make active adjustments using 3 simultaneous processes. And the first step would be the accommodation of the lens, where the changing lens shape to increase refraction. And for near point of vision, it's the closest point on which the eye can focus. And presbyopia is a condition where the loss of accommodation happens when you are over the age of 50. The second step would be the constriction of pupils. And it includes the accommodation pupillary reflex, which involves constriction of pupils to prevent most divergent light rays from entering the eye. This is mediated by the parasympathetic nervous system. The third step would be the convergence of the eyeballs, which involves the medial rotation of the eyeballs causes convergence, and controlled by the somatic motor neuron and the medial which innervates the medial rectus muscle. There are certain conditions involved with the focusing and problems associated with refraction related to the eyeball shape, the myopia, nearsightedness, the hyperopia, farsightedness, and the astigmatism. In myopia, the eyeball is too long, so focal point is in front of the retina, and it's corrected with a concave lens. Hyperopia, eyeball is too short, so focal point is behind the retina, and it's corrected with a convex lens. The astigmatism, unequal curvatures in different parts of the cornea or the lens, and it's corrected with cylindrically ground lenses or laser procedures. This is the amyotropic eye, the focal points lens on the retina. In myopic, the eyeball is too long, the focal points lens anterior to the retina, so it's been corrected by the concave lenses. The hyperopic, the eyeball is too short, the focal points lens beyond the retina, so it's been corrected by the convex lenses. Let's look at the phototransduction and first look at the functional anatomy of photoreceptors. Photoreceptors, now we know, are the rods and the cones, are the modified neurons that resemble upside-down epithelial cells. It consists of cell body, synaptic terminal, and the 2 segments. The outer segment is the light-receiving region, which contains the visual pigments that change shape as they absorb light. The inner segment of each joint cell's bodies, the inner segment connected via cilium to outer segment and to the cell body via the outer fibers. The cell bodies of the inner segment is connected to the synaptic terminal via the inner fibers, and the plasma membrane of the outer segment folds back to form many discs. Photoreceptors are vulnerable to damage. It can degenerate if retina is detached or destroyed by the intense light. The rods are very sensitive to light, making best suited for night vision and peripheral vision. The cones have low sensitivity, so require bright light for activation. It reacts more quickly than rods and have one of three pigments which allow for vividly colored sight. So here you would see the differences and mostly the differences between the rods and the corneas, which I want you to refer. Clinically, color blindness is a common condition which you would see, and it's a lack of one or more corn pigments. It's inherited as an X-linked condition, so more common in males. The most common type is red-green, in which either red cones or green cones are absent. Depending on which cone is missing, red can appear as green, or it could be vice versa. So let's look at the visual pigments now. The retinal pigments is the key light-absorbing molecule which combines with one of four proteins called opsins to form visual pigments. It has been synthesized from vitamin A. Four opsins are the rhodopsin found in the rods. Out of four opsins, rhodopsin found in rods only, and three found in cones, which are the green, blue, and red. Cone wavelengths do overlap, so some wavelengths may trigger more than one cone. The phototransduction is a process by which pigment captures photon of light energy, which is converted into a graded receptor potential. And rhodopsin captures the light, the deep purple pigment of the rods in the rhodopsin. And they are arranged in the rod's outer segment, and three steps of the rhodopsin formation and breakdowns happens. So pigment synthesis, pigment bleaching, and pigment regeneration. Similar process is happening at the cones, but different types of opsins and cones require, and more intense light requires for cones. So in the pigment synthesis, the opsin and 11-cis retinal combine to form rhodopsin in the dark. And during the pigment bleaching, the rhodopsin absorbs light, and the 11-cis isomer of the retinal changes into all trans isomer. And retinal and opsin separates, that is rhodopsin breaking down. With related to the pigment regeneration, all trans retinal converted back into 11-cis isomer, and the rhodopsin is generated in the outer segment again. During the light transduction reaction, light-activated rhodopsin and the activated rhodopsin activates G protein transducin. Transducin activates the PDE, then which leads to breaking down of cyclic GMP, which is the second messenger involved. In the dark, cyclic GMP holds cation channels of the outer segment, opening up sodium and calcium ion, which leads to depolarization of the cell. In the light, cyclic GMP breaks down the channels. And the channel starts to close. Then cell starts to hyperpolarize. So therefore, the hyperpolarization is the signal for vision, unlike the other neural transmission, which is why I have highlighted that in here. The photoreceptors and the bipolar cells generate only a graded potential, not an action potential. So when light hyperpolarizes the photoreceptors, they stop releasing inhibitory neurotransmitter glutamate to the bipolar cells, and the bipolar cells then no longer inhibited and they depolarizes, which release neurotransmitter into ganglionic cells. The ganglion cells are the ones which generate the action potential, which transmitted into the optic nerve and to the brain. Light and dark adaptation is also an important topic that we need to discuss. So rhodopsin is so sensitive that bleaching occurs even at a starlight, and cones responds to bright light. So activation of rods and cones depends on the light adaptation and the dark adaptation. During the light adaptation you would encounter when moving from darkness into a bright light, we see glare because both rods and cones are strongly simulated. At the bright light, the large amounts of pigments are broken down instantly, producing a glare, and pupils constrict. The visual acuity improves over 5 to 10 minutes as rod system turns off and the retinal sensitivity decreases. Cones and neurons rapidly adapt. During the dark adaptation process, such as when moving from bright light into darkness, we see blackness because cones stop functioning in low intensity light, bright light bleached rod pigments, so they are still turned off and the pupils dilate. And rhodopsin accumulates in the dark, so retinal sensitivity starts to increase. The transducing returns to the outer segment and the sensitivity increases within 20 to 30 minutes. Some of the clinical aspects of the topics that we have discussed is the night blindness or nyctalopia is a condition in which rod function is seriously hampered. It's happened due to the rod degeneration commonly caused by prolonged vitamin A deficiency. It can also be caused by retinitis pigmentosa, which is a degenerative retinal disease that destroys the rods. The next important topic would be identifying the visual pathway to the brain. The axons of the retinal ganglion cells form the optic nerve, and the medial fibers from each eye cross over at the optic chiasma and then continues as an optic tract, which means each optic tract contains fibers from lateral temporal aspect of the eye on the same side and the medial aspect of the opposite eye. Each carries information from same half of the visual field. Most fibers of optic tracts continue onto the lateral geniculate nuclei of the thalamus. From there, the thalamic neurons form optic radiation, and then those projects to primary visual cortex in the occipital lobes. So the conscious perception of the visual images occur at the primary visual cortex in the occipital lobes. The other optic tract fibers send branches to midbrain. One set ends in the superior colliculi, which controls the extrinsic eye muscles. A smaller subset of ganglion cells in the retinal contains melanopsin, which projects to the pretectal nuclei. It involves the pupillary reflexes. The suprachiasmatic nucleus of the hypothalamus is the timer for daily biorhythms. So here it's been shown some of the aspects that we have discussed. Here you would see that the optic chiasma and the optic tracts. If you look at the optic tract, you would see the fibers from the opposite side eye, the medial side is coming, as well as the same side, the lateral tracts would come here. So that is why it sits in the optic tract. You would see the same side lateral fibers and the opposite side eye medial fibers over here. The next one would be the depth of the perception. Both eyes view same image from slightly different angles. So at the visual cortex, fuses of these slightly different images happen, which results in three-dimensional image and leads to the depth of perception. So for the depth of perception requires input from both eyes. if an individual loss of an eye or destruction of one optic nerve, that eliminates the true depth perception entirely. If neural destruction occurs beyond the optic chiasma, then part or all of the opposite half of the visual field is lost. For example, this could be happen in stroke, and it can affect the left visual cortex, which leads to blindness in right half of the visual field. The retinal cells split input into channels that include information about the color and the brightness, and sometimes some of the complex information such as the angle, direction, speed of the movement, edges, so on. And the ganglions pass information to the lateral geniculate nuclei of the thalamus to be processed for depth perception with cone input emphasized. At the primary visual cortex, it contains topographical map of retina, and neurons here respond to dark and bright edges and to object orientation, provide form, color, motion inputs to the visual association areas, as well as information is also passed on to the temporal, parietal, and frontal lobes, where objects can be identified and location in the space is going to be determined. So this is the end of the presentation A and B, and I would recommend for you to look at the textbooks and read the textbooks as well.